Hi, everyone. Today we're going to continue our discussion on sort of critical aspects of the Lincoln Douglas topic. And so continuing on, I think one of the things that we can sort of talk about is we were talking a little bit before about neoliberalism. And obviously, when thinking about neoliberalism and thinking about the World Trade Organization, I was kind of just jettisoning or, gesturing towards thinking about neoliberalism and thinking about how neoliberalism exacerbates certain, structural conditions that we face today, right? Obviously, things like, debt, obviously, things like poverty, obviously, things like homelessness, obviously, things like, access to water, access to food, access to health, access to medicine. All of those things exist in relationship to organizing principles that are, based off of a model of a governance that the nation state deems as, usable, as appropriate, right? And so thinking about one of the things that we need to immediately think about is we need to be thinking about debt, right? We need to be thinking that, debt is a sort of efficient tool that the political economy uses to ensure that, other people, are obviously owe the infrastructure, right? Like owe the nation state. And so obviously countries, obviously compete, for, certain markets, and certain production and, certain product, right? Obviously, certain countries obviously have, more cash than others to invest in technologies, in innovation, in, the patents over medicines, right? And so thinking about how, the International Monetary Fund or thinking about how the WTO, all of those things invest in governing certain bodies so that they can produce a healthy, well-fed, literate population, right? They want to have a healthy, non-disease, well-fed, non-starving, literate, not lacking in intelligence, right? That is the most efficient, economic choice that the United States thinks it can make, right? And that is, what, I guess, if we're thinking back to, that's how the US governs itself, right? That's how it models and allows other developing nations to, govern themselves and their countries accordingly. And so if we think about neoliberalism, right, we're thinking about how structural adjustment programs, right? Structural adjustment programs or structural adjustment policies, SAPs, right? Those are things that are imposed by places like the World Trade Organization, by places like the World Bank, by places like the IMF, right? They use these for developing or third world countries, so because they ultimately need to depend on the richer nations in order to sustain their livelihood, right? In order to have access to all of those things that, are important, or that they should have protections over, right? And so that ideology, neoliberalism, produces this to ensure that those countries who are borrowing money from the richer nations, are, legally, bound to a repayment in debt, right? And or if they need something to sort of restructure the economy, right? If they need a new building, a new place, a new bank, it doesn't matter, right? All of those things happen, and it allows those poor countries to, to have, better health policies, better education policies, better development policies, right? Because the nation state projects the ideology that those things are needed, right? So the only thing in supply are those things, and those things are the only things that basically make money, right? And so even if, certain bodies wanted to invest in alternative ways of living, it really becomes a problem about how will those things be supplied in mass, right? How will those things literally be available in mass if economic policies and repayment processes are all built and structured around maintaining the U.S. nation state and its, standard of living, right? And so if we think about, why providing financial assistance to those countries who need it, quotes on needed, it produces this ideology that that associates, that exists as a precondition to, getting money, right? And so it allows the nation state to say that it's taking all of these gains to, invest and to develop other countries, which, to other countries seems amazing or seems, necessary or seems like long overdue, right? Regardless of the sentiment, those poor countries do it because they have to, right? And that's why, it allows the neoliberal economy and the neoliberal ideology to sustain itself, because those poor countries need to develop, need to depend on the US for, any type of exports or, at all, right? And so that's why it allows the U.S. to sort of spend less, do all these things while increasing, the commodity value or the commodification of those bodies. And so that's kind of one way that the World Trade Organization, manufactures a violent form of development practices, and sort of how it sort of models those practices for other emerging economies. And it's sort of how those places, allow it basically produces and reinvests and sustains the sort of violent commodification of those bodies. And so thinking about those conditions and those market conditions and why those developing countries need to rely on those types of things, and why the protections and the protection laws from those developing policies are ultimately violent and ultimately reproduce a sort of cyclical process where we have to continually depend on those, is sort of where you want to go when discussing the World Trade Organization and neoliberalism. Thank you.